long ways, and if I knock it down, we won't do it that way anymore. All right. So I understand all the books are sold. So in the spirit of supply and demand, I'll sell you my book for $50. I'm just kidding. So we're in chapter 2, right? Priorities. Okay, before we do that, I promised you a pop quiz, so we're going to do that. So try not to look. Avoid the temptation to cheat, I guess is the Christian way to say it, right? What are the 5 levels of leadership? What's the first one? Let's try to do this, see how many we can get without looking. The first one's what? First one's position, correct. Okay, so position, good. What's the next one? Good. And you guys aren't looking, are you? Okay, that's good. That's a safe answer. What's the third one? Production, yes. Well, that's good. That's a start. All right, production. What's the next one?
People development.
Good. That's right. And then the last one? Good. All right. Okay, now this gets interesting. Now we're going to do the R's, but if you already have given a answer, let's let other people jump in. So the first one, position is about what? What's the R? Anybody know? Relationship is right here. Good job. All right. Does anybody know? Good. Okay. So if you've already answered any of them, let's let other people do it. So we've got 3 R's left. It's like Vanna White, you know. Responsibility? It's close. Think of the guy that's pounding the table. Starts with an R. Yeah. Again, there's other ways to say it. This is just kind of the way he does it. So rights, right? It's all about rights. I'm the boss, right? What are these two? Anybody guess? Yes, good job. Which one? Yep. Reproduction. Good job. All right. That's an R. And production would be, yes, results. All right, good job. So the position is the guy that has the name plate on his desk, and that's all he's got, right? He's got a title. That's it. Permission is the guy that has a relationship. He builds a relationship with you. Production's about working together to get stuff done. People development is reproducing yourself, right, in others. Personhood is respect. And of course, the guy down here, he's demanding, because he's all about rights, respect right away, without going through the process, right? And we're at different levels with different people, depending upon what kind of situation we're in. So we don't want to be the guy that's always expecting everybody to, kind of like this guy. Just, you should treat me a certain way because I'm whatever, right? You go stop and buy gas. I don't care if you're king of the world. You're the customer, right? So you need to be able to relate to people down here. So good. Which one takes the longest? Yes, absolutely. Why do you think so? That's right. So if I skip this and go from here to here, what happens? Yeah, not for very long. So it's kind of like the Jenga blocks, right? If I'm building a block house and I pull that out, what happens? Crash, right? And this is why businesses, companies, churches, they're doing like this. Did I mention Mark Driscoll last time as an example of this? He was the guy in Seattle. Okay, so wow, just, and then bang. And because he didn't, very gifted, but not a lot of maturity. And that's not a good combination, right? So you need And the thing about maturity is we can all get maturity eventually, right, by doing these things. So, absolutely. Yeah, because if I skip this, people are going to feel manipulated and used. Why? Because that's really what we're doing to them, right? And I know because I've done this, and I have a tendency to skip that part, and that's not good. So I know that about me. I need to really camp out here with people. Good. So what Bible verses would support this relational thing? You guys remember what we used last time? There's lots of Bible verses, but the great what? Great commandment, right? Which is what? Yeah, love God, love, right. So that's all biblical stuff. And then this one is serve God, like worship the Lord only, and serve the Lord, worship the Lord only. I forget my Bible verses mixed up. A lot of Bible verses about serving God, right? Doing ministry. And then this one is a great commandment, right? Making disciples is really what this is. So, and then you've heard a couple illustrations. The one about I won't do this every week. I'm just trying to get this kind of, this is something we want to use every day, in our lives when we're connecting with people. We want to have more influence with them. And we mentioned this last week. Why in the world would we want to have influence? Why is influence important as a Christian? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and can I bring anybody to Christ if I have no influence with them? No, they're going to be like, who are you, right? Can I grow anybody up in Christ if I have no influence on them? No. So this is the nuts and bolts. It's easy for us to say, go make disciples. Go ye therefore. Okay, cool. See you next week, right? But, well, how do you do that, right? What do you do day to day? That's what I love about this. It really breaks it down in our American culture how this works. And it's not just America. It's other places in the world, but specifically to here. So having influence with people is a huge thing. So like I mentioned before, guy comes to the door for the first time, and you find out he's new, and you go, let me go get Pastor so-and-so. You go grab Pastor so-and-so or Elder so-and-so, and you say, this is our pastor. And they go, okay. So position. So whether that's good or bad, that's where you start. But if you've been praying for somebody that you work with, your neighbor, whatever, you've been working with them, and they come to church, you say, oh, this is Pastor so-and-so. He's a great guy. He buried my dad. He married my kids. Or you're going to love him. I just started them off right here. I'm borrowing that relational relationship I have with them, position, you might say, relational level. I'm letting my pastor or elder or whoever I'm trying to connect people with borrow my level too. So you start off here, which is a good thing. That's what you want to see happening in a church. And then, of course, the other way to do this is when we talked about the nursery thing, right? Remember that? So, a lot of times we announce things from the pulpit in big groups. I'm learning things about raising money too, stuff that you'd think almost 50 years old I would have known this stuff, but I'm just learning it. That raising money in groups is really not the way to do it. It's individually. I would have never known that, right? Same thing. Making announcements, like Doug can testify this. When we went to preacher school, they taught us stuff totally backwards, it seems like. But making announcements doesn't work because you usually get the people that you really don't want leading it, right? So if you say, we need help in the nursery or help with the, babies, you get people that, I wouldn't leave my baby with that person, right? Kind of a thing. And we'll sit in the pew and we'll say, well, I don't like babies, no thanks, right? But if I'm hanging out with somebody and they become my friend and they say, hey, Mike, you know what? I'm volunteering my church Sunday and I'm kind of short-handed. I could really use your help. Could you come and help me? Well, it's like, well, I don't like babies, not changing diapers, but because you're my friend, I'll help you out. And that's how this works, right? In the context of a relationship, things progress up, kind of a thing. And then again, if a person gets connected to the church and then they get plugged in, then I can kind of come alongside of them and say, hey, why don't you do the same thing I did with you, right? And you go find someone to have vitamin water with, tea, water, or coffee. And then after you've built a relationship, invite them to come and help. And then what we've done is we've reproduced ourselves, right? So now we have 2 or 3 of us, right? Same is true in all areas. Yep.
What keeps coming back to me is that's exactly what Jesus did.
Yep. Yeah, I would say all the good things in life that work are, plagiarized or stolen from Jesus. I can't. Sorry, I'm shutting down too early today, so sorry about that. I've had a lot of conversations in a short amount of time. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what's neat about this stuff. It's biblical wisdom, and it works, right? Let's see. So what happens if everybody in the world just decided no more babies after tonight? What would happen eventually? Yep. Same's true with churches, right? If we don't reproduce ourselves, it's only a matter of time we won't be around. So it's real important that we understand how to do this and put this into place. And this just isn't for pastors. This just isn't for elders. This is for people who are breathing. So if you're breathing and you're alive, especially if you're part of the body of Christ, this is for you. This is, you might not be compensated, so you don't need to work a job, so you have more time to do this. Or you might have a job and then you have 5 or 10 hours of volunteer time for your local church, but and just life in general. But you want to use this because it will make the church, multiply its effectiveness a whole lot. Any questions about this?
It's sequential, but it appears the bottom one, you don't need the bottom.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the position. You can go straight with a relationship
Yep.
and build from there.
Yep. And I think he starts here by just saying that a lot of times we'll get a position and we'll just think, okay, I'm good. I'm the manager or whatever. And that's, But you're right. Leadership really starts here. This is really level 1. And that's kind of the basement, -1, if you want to say that. But yeah, good point.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Do you see that there's any difference in following this between men or women?
No difference at all. No difference at all. In fact, I was coaching a guy, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, and he was having some challenges because he and his elders would talk in their meeting, and then he'd go home and his wife would change his mind. And I'd say, well, then you need, theoretical, right? You know how that works. And I'd say, well, then you need to start meeting with her. And he goes, oh, what do you mean? I go, well, she's the influencer, right? So it absolutely has nothing to do with, if you're male or female or if you're confused and transgender. That's a bad joke. But anyway, it really has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with influence, right? I know of some women that are way more influential than men, and in all kinds of different settings, and vice versa. It just kind of depends on. And it's not necessarily a natural thing, although I think sometimes people figure this stuff out innately, or they observe it and they don't really know all this, but they're just good at it. But we can all do this, which is really good. So like I told him, I said, you need to meet with her. You need to share it with her, let her process it, because if you don't, you're going to be sorry later, because she's going to throw wrenches in the thing, right? So I think a lot of times, whatever we believe biblically about, women being elders and all that kind of stuff, and we could have a discussion about that, you and me and vitamin water, because it's better to do it that way. But anyway, I believe pretty conservatively, I guess, on that. But at the same time, I think the real issue is God wants us all to have influence with people, and he wants us to bring people to Christ. And a lot of times we get caught up in, got to do it this way and that way, and we forget, how things can move forward and that kind of a thing. But yeah, good question. Cool. All right, let's jump in to our priorities. Did anybody bring, what do they call it? A Bible, I think is what they call them. Let's see. If you brought your Bible, or Matthew 25, we're going to 14 to 30, and we're going to just read 24 to 30. But that bigger context is kind of part of that. So look at Matthew 25, Matthew chapter 25, verses 24 to 30 is what we're going to actually read. And as you turn there, you'll probably see kind of the overall context. Does anybody remember what kind of parable this is, or the name of it? What was that? Money. Yep. I think traditionally it's called what? The talents, which is totally confusing, but anyway. Gold, right? Money. Absolutely. Okay. Somebody have a really big outside voice that they don't mind using inside? Go ahead and read that.
Which one? 14 to 30?
24 to 30. Because there's 3 guys, right? Let's back up. So the first guy is the 10 talent guy, right? And what happens to him? You guys remember in the story? Right, 10 more. That's a good investment. And then when the next guy is what, 5? And what happens to him? Yeah, good job. Now this guy, right? And of course, the moral of the story is don't be this guy. So let's go ahead and read it.
Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, You wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Wow, that doesn't sound good so don't be that guy, right?
Right.
You don't want, weeping and gnashing of teeth just doesn't sound good. I don't think there's any way to spin that. Okay, good. So we have some trash talk, right? Some accusations, right? So the servant accuses the master of what? What does he call him? He throws mud at him. He says, you're a what? You're a hard man. Hard man, harsh man. Okay. And then he defines it. How is he a hard man? He gives him 2 examples. Sow, no reap. What else? So scatter, no gather, right? So yeah, you reap where you don't sow, and you gather where you don't scatter seeds, right? And that's what? Good or bad? Right or wrong? Right. It's wrong, right? From servant's perspective, that's wrong, right? So we have to say wrong. Okay. Oh, you got to do it this way too. So then the master turns around and accuses the servant. He said, oh yeah? You're a what? Calls him 2 names, actually. Yeah. I don't know why. It just makes me laugh when I hear the word wicked and lazy. It sounds like the sluggard in Proverbs. Just, But anyway. Wicked and lazy, right? Now he gives them some examples. Here's why you're wicked and lazy. What are the 2 examples? And it's not readily apparent of the 2, but.
You didn't do anything.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah. Right. So no interest, right, with the bankers.
Which assumes he didn't do any physical work himself.
Yeah, the guy is super lazy, man. In fact, he's so lazy, I bet you I could start calling banks right now and leaving messages saying, I got some gold and I don't know what to do with it. I bet I get a call back pretty fast, right? Why is that? Because that's what bankers do. You got gold, Mike? Come on over. We got a cappuccino machine. We got a nice massage chair. Bring your gold. We'll take good care of you. I mean, how hard is that to pick up the phone or ask a banker, what should I do with all this money? I mean, they have lots of ideas, right? I mean, that is really lazy. I mean, wow. And then did you catch the other one?
Yeah, he did what he wanted to do instead of what his master said.
Yep. And I like what he said. Does your version say you knew? You knew what? You knew I was a hard man, right? That I sow where I don't, reap where I don't sow, and I gather where I don't. You already knew that ahead of time, right? So, you can't accuse me of something that you already knew about, right? Which is interesting. Now, we're talking about this principle. You probably know what this means, right? What does that mean? Yep, absolutely. So investors are always looking for that. We want to return on our investment. And that's definitely the master. Now, who does the master represent in the parable? Yep. Yeah, and we know that because if we read the rest of the context of Matthew 25, it's pretty evident. And the servant would be people, right? For lack of a better word. God's followers, God's people. So isn't this interesting? The reason I bring this up is because sometimes when I start talking about priorities, I don't like priorities. I want everything, and I want it right now, and I don't want to have to choose, right? That's just me. I'm pretty shallow, but it's like, do you want a piece of pecan pie or a piece of coconut cream pie? Well, yes, right? I don't want to choose, right? But that's what's tough about this chapter is priorities, right? It's the idea of being able to distinguish between one thing or the other. And not necessarily something is good and bad, but something that's good or better, right? Or more effective kind of a thing. So when I talk about this, I want us to understand this is a godly principle, right? God, what? He gives me life, breath. He saves me, sends his son to die for me. He gives me a church family, And so he expects what? He expects a return on that investment that he's given in me, right? He expects me to go out there, right? Kind of like we talked about last time, the Great Commission is more about my part is to go, right? He will change the people's lives. He will make the disciples if I go, right, and love people and share the good news with them. He'll do the hard work, but he's waiting for me to actually go and do it. So anyway, okay, good kind of intro to that. So priorities chapter, couple of things. I like the graph. What page is that on in your book? Yeah, and it's trying to think. I haven't looked. Is it this next line solid or? Okay, there we go, down to 8. Okay, thanks. Okay, did you guys get this? Does it make sense? Crystal clear, huh?
I mean, I think their percentages are wrong. It was more like, I always thought 10% of the people did 90% of the work.
Well, if you're in the 10%, it sure feels that way. I know that, right? Another way this is called, this is the Pareto principle because it's the 80-20. Another way to call this is the law of the critical few. Is another way to say it if you like business stuff. But the idea is that you leverage things, right? If I focus my attention on the critical few, I'll have a bigger, impact. It's called profit, right? This is how not just American evil capitalism works, right? That's why we did this, right? It's how what? Life is, right? God's like, okay, I'm giving you freedom, but you've got to decide where you're going to put your time, money, energy, efforts, and all that. And you need to put it if you put it in the right things, you'll get a return on it. If you put it in the wrong things, you won't, right? So that's kind of how this works. What ends up happening is, like Doug and I went to preacher school, Bible college, whatever, and they taught us that if we work really hard and we did ministry for people and we spent all of our time trying to meet everybody's needs, that's how you're supposed to do it. And ministry is just hard and it's just tough. And guys get burnt out, worn out, and tired, but hey, our reward's in heaven and stuff, right? That's just a bunch of hooey. That's not even biblical. But we were taught that stuff, That's what's, I want my money back. I paid good money for this education. It was messed up. It blew me away. Somebody was, kind of similar with Doug and I went to Bible college and all that, and he was on a mission, kind of a local mission, kind of like CM, but different. And he went around with his display and all that, and he realized that he said, my business model was flawed. And I went, that is a good way to say it. In other words, he was going broke. He wasn't making enough money to take care of his family. And so he flipped that around, and now he's doing well, right? And some people will say, well, you're not in the ministry anymore. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? It just realized that he had wisdom to catch that. What this says that if you focus on the top 20% of your influencers, they will take care of the rest of it. So the reality is I can work really hard, do things for people, try to meet everybody's needs, and guess what? You're going to get a worn out, tired, grumpy pastor, and nobody's going to like to be around him, right? And then as anything else, I teach other people to be grumpy and unhappy, and if you want to be a Christian, you have to be worn out and tired like me, and it's just not a good thing, right? Or I can be wise, like the Bible says, and focus on the top 20% of the influencers, and then they'll take care of the 80%. So my focus is on the top 20, they focus on the rest of it, and guess what? Everybody who is interested in being a part of the church and open will have their needs met, which is just I wish I'd have known this 30 years ago, but it's really genius stuff. I like his illustration about 20% of the people eat 80% of the pies or something like that. That's
Food, yeah.
if you've been to any potlucks, you understand that. So I kind of like what he says with the high importance, high urgency, priority assignments. And then he has a good comment there. A life in which anything goes will ultimately be a life in which nothing goes. So true. So in my world, I have to think through priorities because I literally, our board doesn't call me up every day and say, okay, did you punch your time clock in? I have a lot of freedom. And it's challenging because I have to figure out, okay, where do I focus most of my time to get the highest leverage of that? And it's not easy to do. I have high importance things that people see, but things that are very important, and high important things that aren't urgent, that I need to do. And I shift those around. Like, say, for instance, there are some things that I did early on that I don't do anymore. Like, I used to go to all the ministers' meetings. Now, if I can coach a pastor and help him turn his church around, I do that instead. I don't mind hanging out with ministers and loving on them and praying with them and feeling connected with them. But if I can help a guy turn his church around, that's a lot more better use of my time than hanging out with a group of guys. And I try to still make it, but But initially, they needed to get to know me like that relational thing, right? Like I mentioned before, I went from being in California for 13 years and doing a lot of discipleship, a lot of people development, to being the guy with the title, right? The new CM guy. Nobody knew me, but it took time for me to build those relationships. But so those things shift as you understand that. There's other things. I think Covey wrote a book about quadrant 2 and that kind of thing. So this isn't the only tool for time management, but it's good to kind of think through what you're doing, what gives you the most return, or that's one of them. So this other one I like too. Well, he does make the reference to who will fill my calendar. Not will my calendar be full, but who will fill my calendar. Will I see people, but who will I see, that kind of a thing. Then he has a good list on page 25, the list of leaders and followers. I'm coaching a guy I just started. We met for last week and then this week, I think it was Tuesday. And he's like, most of what I'm doing is the follower stuff. And I go, well, I get that. You went to Bible college like me. That's what we were trained to do, right? You react to everything, right? You just react to stuff, and you don't really lead. You're not proactive, and you don't really lead people. So that list is really good to think through. And again, this isn't just for the guy that we're going to look for as a pastor, but this is just as much for you to say, okay, as a person of this church, my volunteer time, 5-10 hours, whatever, am I prioritizing that? And the rest of my life, am I prioritizing that? So that frees me up to do ministry things, here with my church or in the community to connect new people to Christ, that kind of a thing. So it's important for all of us to do that. So that's a good list to kind of look at. Now, what I like here is these 3 R's. These are really good. And anybody read those off for me? What are those 3 R's in the next part of that? Yep, that's it. Thanks, Al. So if I don't say them out loud, Dewey is going to give me one of those looks like, I'm just kidding. So, required, 3 R's. What's required of me? What kind of return I get on it, right? Again, we're speaking like an evil capitalist. Again, joke, right? No, not evil capitalist. Reality, that's how life is down here. Return, and then reward, right? And this is more of what I like to do, kind of a thing. Okay, so for lack of a better, or for the sake of time, I'll use myself as an example because I know myself pretty well, I guess. I think I do. So there's, let's see. Did I do 4? Yeah, I guess I did 4. So there's 4 things that are required of me in a general way. I kind of had a hand at kind of shaping my job description. So CEM exists to start church planting churches. So I'm required to find guys that want to start church planting churches, right? So not just a church, but a church that wants to help us start another church, and it multiplies, kind of thing. So that's the thing that we're about. So I need to find church planters, and I was actually on the phone out in the parking lot. Hopefully we'll reel them in and start a church with them. So that's part of my job, is find church planters, and then so recruit and develop church planting churches. So to start church planting churches by recruiting and developing church planters. So I recruit them and I develop them, right, by coaching them. Recruit and develop supporters, right? So people who pray for us and give us financial support. And then 4 is leadership development. Recruit and develop leaders in our churches and around our state. So those are the 4. So now, what gives me the highest return? Well, it's 1 through 4. If I do these 4 things, I'll get a higher return. So if we don't start churches, guess what's going to happen? People will stop giving us money. Why? Because we're not doing what we said. You know what I mean? That's fair. So we need to keep starting churches, and these things all work out. And if our churches aren't healthy and we don't have leadership growth in our churches, then churches won't be around to have money to help us start churches. So it all kind of works together, right? So anyway, now what do I like to do? I like to do 1. I like to do 2. I like to do 4. I don't like this, the green eggs and ham thing. I don't like raising money. I just don't. So guess what happens? Guess which one do I not do very much of? That's my job, right? And it's going to give me the better return. But guess what? I don't always do it because I don't like it, right? So what's good about this is, again, it's not just for the pastor guy, the elder guys, or whatever in our church. It's for you. So whether this is at work, I mean, you can use this at work in your job, and it works at your job. You can do it at home with your time there. But especially your volunteer time at your church, right? You can line up, okay, I'm the nursery person or whatever. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, boom, boom, boom. Because if you're not getting a return on it, why in the world, then you need to change the requirements because it's not going to help anybody. And especially if you don't like to do it, you're going to neglect it. So what I like about this is it helps you notice if something is out of alignment. So for me, it's raising money. So I had to ask myself, why do I not like to raise money? Well, 2 reasons. One is just a skill thing. I've never raised money outside the local church. In a local church, you can kind of, you're up on your music stand or your pulpit, and you can kind of give people the evil eye, talk to them about how people are going to hell without Jesus, and you need to give, and Malachi 3:10, that stuff. You kind of just have those levers you push, and people give money, right? But it's different when you don't get to do that every week, right? You can't see people and give them the evil eye every week. It doesn't work, right? So it's a whole different thing, right? Diana's shaking her head. She knows I'm kidding. But anyway, I'm as sweet as a teddy bear. I have no evil eye at all. But anyway, what is it? So it's a whole different skill set. I am just like a fish out of water. So I got a coach that's raised money for like over 20 years. She's working with Alzheimer's now. She's fantastic. She actually moved back in the state of Iowa about a year before I did, so it was great. But she sat me down and said, okay, the board, what they expect you to do is not going to work, so don't do that. So she said, here's what you do. And so I took it to board and said, okay, she said you don't know what you're doing, and I should do this. And they said, okay, do that. So some of it was the technical training and skills. So she's helping me with that, which is good. So I got a coach, right, to help me out. The other thing is I had to go inside of me and say, okay, why do I not like to do that? Why is there this resistance to it? Well, when I was a kid, grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and we went to Countryside Christian Church. It was a big church back then. I think we were running over 1,000 in the 70s, and so there was a lot of people that went. So we'd park, and I would walk with my dad, through the parking lot to the front door of the church, and there'd be a Jaguar, a Mercedes, a BMW, Bentley, and all of them, right? All the high-end performance luxury cars, right? And my dad would complain about them. Oh, look at that, guy's got all that money, right? Negatively, right? So, and then I go in, and we'd sit down in the pew, and we had a pretty good staff. I think we had like 4 or 5 people on staff, which was big back in the 70s. And they would list the every now and then they'd list the salaries for the staff. And my dad looked at that and go, oh my gosh, look at that guy, he's making all that kind of money, right? And so I'm growing up with this, right? And so what do? I become a pastor, right? And then what's even worse than that, I ask people for money, right? It's even worse than being a pastor. So I'm going against my dad's view about life, right? Now, my dad's wrong, It's not about how much money you have at all. The Bible's real clear about that. And he's also wrong that I'm not asking money for me. I'm asking money for Jesus, right? Jesus wants to start churches and bring people together. So I have my dad's voice in my head. It gets crowded in there, trust me. And then I have my true dad, right, my Heavenly Father, and so I have to decide which voice I'm going to listen to, right? So that helped me kind of work through some of that stuff because I lined this up and I saw where something was off. So this is a good exercise to do. I'd encourage you to use it or do something similar with that. Anyway, all right. But the same is true like when you think about a senior pastor's role, elders' roles, people's roles, what's going to give us higher return. And for goodness sake, if what we're doing isn't working, then let's change it up. Page 28, priority principles. I think it's in the same page where he says, priorities continually shift and demand attention. I'd underline that or whatever you do, dog-ear it or star it or whatever, highlight it. Priorities continually shift and demand attention. Well-placed priorities always sit on the edge. And that's a good quote. And that's the challenge about leadership is things change all the time and you have to stay up on what's going on. For instance, when I first started with CEM 5 years ago, I came out with a report, and the board was thrilled because they hadn't had a report in a long time. And so I would give them a monthly report. So the first time I did a monthly report, I think it took me like a half an hour to create. All the miles I drove, all the people I met with, all the churches I visited on Sunday. I mean, I just put everything in there, right? Sent it out. Man, everybody emailed me back. Oh, Mike, we hired the right guy. It was great. And all these reviews. They love me. This is so good, right? And so all this great feedback, way to go. This is perfect. This is just what we need. Then the second month I did it and I sent it out. One guy replied back, thanks. That was it. It wasn't as fun, Yeah. And then third month, like crickets, nothing, right? Fourth month, nothing. Fifth month. I hit 6th month. I was thinking, okay, I don't think they're reading them. And then then I was kind of like, well, why aren't they reading them, right? Putting all this work in it. Then I realized, oh, they trust me. So I stopped doing it, right? Now, I didn't just, I'll, sit on the couch and eat bonbons and watch Mexican soap operas because they're better. I'm just kidding. But anyway, I know I shouldn't say that. But what I do now is I text where I'm going, and it goes up on our website because, I don't have an office, and so people can see I'm working, right? And so if anybody wants to know where have you been, what have you been doing, it's all I can just pull it down and give it to you. But no one has ever asked me. So that's a way I've saved a half an hour a month out of my schedule just by realizing, okay, at this phase in my role at this organization, I don't have to do this anymore. I needed to at the beginning, but now I don't. So we always need to kind of review how we're doing things. We don't want to just do something the same way all the time because we're not going to get good results from that. So let's see. I love the illustration on the concert violinist, page 29. Someone want to tell me what that one's about? I use that a lot. I think about that when I walk around sometimes. Plan neglect, that's right. So she was cleaning her room. See, this is a good excuse for me not to have to clean anything. I love it. She was cleaning her room. She's making her bed. She was doing all this stuff. And then she go practice, and her results weren't that good. But then she purposely neglected all that, went in and did her violin lessons first, or her training, her practice. Then she improved as a violinist. So that is a good thing to remember. We don't have to say yes to everything. We can say, oh, no, thanks, We can turn things down because we're choosing to neglect some things so that we can do better and more important things. Yeah.
One of the hardest areas that I've applied this to is that high importance, high urgency group. When you realize, I'm not going to get this done, and it's important, do you keep trying to get it done, or let it go and deal with the consequences?
Yeah, that's hard. So that's the difference between the high urgency and the high importance one, right?
Well, it's both high urgency and importance, but
right.
There comes a point
Right.
where you're just not going to.
Right, and there's some jobs like yours where software stuff, if software doesn't work, you have thousands of people that don't like you, right? And so that's different. You really can't. Obviously there's things that you do to prevent those things, which obviously if you don't. And I think what's important is, being able to try to take some downtime out, because that's a hard job too. It's kind of like being an ambulance driver or a police officer. You're always on all the time, or can be. Yeah, you don't get shot at usually. You could though if you don't get my computer working on time. But yeah, it's not as easy. And again, this, we don't want to make this sound like this is all easy, right? It's not necessarily easy, but these are tools to help us improve, with our leadership things. I think the main thing with that is don't focus on low urgency stuff, right? If it's low urgency, low important, why bother, right? Delegate it to somebody else if you have to. But yeah, it's but you do have to weigh that out if you have to deal with the consequences and hope they understand later. And it's tough because sometimes you're faced with things that have to be done right away, but you know that if you do this right away, you could be doing something to prevent something worse later down the road. So you have to kind of communicate and work through that, which is definitely true. that's a lot of what leadership is doing. And really, the people that have, positions above you should be troubleshooting things and making your life better. But that's not always how it works, right? But that's kind of the idea of that. I like the other illustration of page 31 about the animal trainers with the stool and the legs. I never knew that until I read this book. I'm like, oh, that's why they do that, right? And so this is kind of the same thing that happens when my wife says, hey, let's go shopping. I just lose all energy. And yeah. I mean, shopping is like, because, my wife doesn't just want to get milk, right? I know where the milk is and I can be out in 5 minutes, And my wife's pretty good, to be all fair. But I know some ladies, they'll be like, oh, what's this? And, oh, we need some more of that. And I just want to lay on the concrete floor. You're not supposed to do that and take a nap and just kick me when it's time to go, right? Kind of a thing. And so, and that's a tough thing when we get a lot of priorities, they paralyze us. So we have to kind of to plan. What he does is he tries to plan ahead, right? Each month, plan and lay out priorities for next month. And again, we might not think of this in terms of how we serve in our local church, but if we did, our church would be healthier and it would grow if we think about, okay, I have so much time for my volunteer church time. Let me prioritize it. Let me think about it. It's something that I've learned too. I don't know if it's in here or not, but if you have a cyclical calendar like CEM, there's things that I have to do every year, or I think I have to do, I guess, is a better way to say it. So I try to learn, okay, some things went well, some things didn't. So next year when I do this, I'm going to plan a little bit earlier, or I'm not going to do that. And you make yourself notes, or you figure that out so that you're able to kind of think through that ahead of time as well. Let's see. We'll skip that one. When do we scoot out of here? 8 o'clock? Okay. Sounds good. So another priority word is target. And we're going to start talking about this as we get closer to vision. Target is really important because without a target, you have no context or no audience for your vision and values as a church, right? What we typically do is we'll take the elders out, and as pastors, we're trained to do that. So we take our elders out. We have a retreat. We roast marshmallows. We sing Kumbaya. We feel God's presence. We're really tight and close, right? And then we come up with our vision statement, right? And we cram every single Bible verse there ever was into this paragraph and the things like this big, right? Got to get it all in there. And we take it back to the church and say, this is what God is, like Moses with the Ten Commandments. This is what God has called our church to do. It's awesome. And everybody's like, okay, or yay, or whatever, But what we fail to do is we haven't identified who our target is. Jesus told us to go, right, and make more and better followers of him, right? So that would include growing the people up, right? Make better ones, you teach them to obey all things. But that first one is essential, right? You baptize, right? You find people that aren't disciples yet or followers yet, and you make them. So that means what? I've got to be able to communicate with them. So if somebody comes into my church or they hear about my church or someone says, what is my church about? I'll go, I don't know. I think it's on my bulletin. It's like about that big, and I don't really know what it is because it's just too long. We don't say that to them, but we probably go, well, I don't know exactly. It's just kind of cool. We do church stuff, So we don't think about our target. And God's called us to reach this target, and we don't even consider them in the equation when we come up with our vision and value. So that's why target's so important. So now, target is a priority kind of lever, right? If I focus on my target, I'm making a priority to say, I'm going to focus on this group of people instead of everybody else. Now, that doesn't sound very Christian, right? Because Christian's all about everyone's welcome, right? So let me kind of help you walk through this. Some people say, well, target is not biblical because Paul said, I become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might win some of Christ, right? Oh, yeah, you're right. That is biblical. For who? For Paul, right? He is one guy. And I would say we need to be like Paul. And if I'm hanging out with somebody, I need to figure out how I connect with them and build a relationship and share the gospel with them. For instance, I grew up in Wichita, and we had two choices of music, country or Western, and that was it. And, they like to smoke and wear cowboy hats and boots in Wichita. Not so much anymore, but back in the 60s and 70s, it was kind of a cowboy town, right? So anyway, I didn't like, until the rock station came, I didn't like music. But anyway, I can talk Merle Haggard and those old guys with anybody because I grew up with that stuff. So I can pretend I like country music to bring you to Christ, and then we get you dunked and, it looks like it's going to take and you're following Jesus. I can do a confession with you and say, man, I hate country music. I'm sorry I lied to you, man. I just can't stand it. But hey, you're a Christian now, so you have to forgive me, right? So it works out. But a group can't do that. A church can't, it can't say, okay, what kind of music do you like? Okay, quick. He likes this music, and you real fast. You have to decide on a group that you're going to go after, and you have to make decisions based on how to connect with them. So, for instance, biblical examples of target. Jesus said, remember the Gentile lady is grabbing on him and says, help me out, and he goes, hey, I don't want to. It's not right to throw the children's bread to the dogs, right? Remember that? Who did he say he came for? He said, I've come for the what? Remember that? The lost sheep of who? The house of Israel, right? That's his target. Isn't that interesting? Actually, Jesus didn't really go out and he didn't do a missionary journey. He kind of got short straw there. He didn't get to do that cool stuff that Paul got to do, right? He stayed in Jerusalem and Judea, Galilee, and right in that area, he hung out with Jews, right? That was his focus. That was his target. Now, he died for the sins of the world, which I'm thankful for, because then everybody can be a part of it. But he prioritized his time, and he had a target when he was here. Paul was the apostle to who? Yeah, that's a target. Now, he kind of snuck over to the synagogue and said, hey, because he cared about him, but he focused on the Gentiles, right? He didn't just stay in Jerusalem and everything's cool. He went out. And now Peter was an apostle to who? Yep, the Jews, right. So they all had targets. So it's biblical to have a target. What's important when we think about targets is we need to say everyone's welcome, but this is our target. In other words, this is what we're going to focus on. This is what we feel God's called us to reach, this target. Now, we'll talk about how do you identify that, and we'll work on that later. But it's important to think about this from a priority standpoint, because we're saying the decisions that we make are going to be made for our target. So when our target comes in, somebody from our target comes in, they'll go, wow, this is my kind of place. These are my kind of people. I love this place, right? And ideally, that's not a Methodist you're stealing or a Baptist you're stealing or whatever. It's somebody that's not following Jesus, doesn't have a church background, right? Which means you got to think through that, and how they understand things and all that. But again, you say everyone's welcome, but this is our target. So you're welcome to come, but we're trying to reach this group of people. So if you want to be a part of that, great, fantastic. Help us reach that group. If you want us to be something else, right? Well, there's lots of churches in town that are reaching religious people, right? If you have a church background, you like church, you like traditional stuff, I could give you 15 churches that are doing that. So, have fun. And it really comes down to this. We're going to be okay, right? If you don't come to church for a while, and you're going to another church, I might miss you, but you're going to be fine. You're going to another church. But there's people that are going to hell in our town, and that's not okay with Jesus, right? And he wants us to find a way to reach them. So that's this idea of target and why that's important. Another thing to say about target's important is to say that by having a target, you'll reach more people that are not in your target than by not having a target at all. I know that's kind of sounds like a trick, but so what I'm saying is this. If I don't have a target, I'm attracting a certain group of people without even knowing what it is, and I'm not being very effective by default. But if I decide this is, if we say this is our target and we focus on that, I'm going to bring more people to Christ that don't fit that target than if I didn't have one. Why? Because people will go like, wow, that church is doing stuff. Things are happening over there. They have a purpose and a direction, and they're moving, and they're being effective, and I want to be a part of something, that is making a difference. So you'll get people that don't fit the target, but they'll want to be a part of something that's going on. And also you'll get people that say, you know what? My grandkids would love this church, or my kids would love this place, and that kind of thing. So you'll get people that don't fit your target that will help you reach your target by actually identifying one. And again, I would say it's actually a biblical thing to do to make us effective to accomplish that. Let's see. I already talked about employees being dogs last week, right? Volunteers being cats, remember that? So you can motivate a dog by waving the paycheck in front of them. They don't have to like you, but they'll do whatever. But you can't do that with volunteers. You can't say, drop and give me 20, right? What, right? You have to encourage them by vision and saying, we're having a great time here, and you're welcome to come, but, we're not going to wait for you. We're having a great time over here. Kind of like a cat will kind of come up to you. Let's see. So let's do... page Let me borrow your book. Haven't memorized it yet. Okay, so I asked you guys to look up or to think through influencers. So page,
The end of page.
yeah, so page 18, right? Top 5 influencers. And then also page 22, right? Where right across from this, where it says, how do you know, right? How to identify the top 20 influencers produced from our organization? You guys get that? I suggest you make a list of everyone in your company or department, then ask yourself this question about each individual. As this person takes a negative action against me or withdraws his or her support from me, what will be my impact likely be? If you won't be able to function, then guess what? They're an influencer, right? If the person can help you or hurt you, but really can't make or break you in terms of ability to get important things done, then don't put a check mark. So that's kind of how you weed out the top 20 from the rest of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some uncomfortable things here. And we're going to actually write people's names down. So I'll erase it so no one gets embarrassed afterwards. So let's just list some influencers, and then we'll circle the top 20% afterwards. So don't worry about if I think, or someone else thinks one way or the other. Let's just write down some influencers. Doug, okay. Okay, who else? What's that?
Elders.
I need a name. Okay. Dewey, Al, okay. Dennis. Okay. Okay, who else? Mervin. Okay. If I spell your name wrong, don't take it personal. I'm just illiterate. That's why I speak for a living. What else? Who else? Rick. Okay. Deb. Okay. Who else? Stephanie. Okay. Okay, who else? Yeah, there's like guys and girls, like Amish. This is good. I like it. Less temptation in church. And you just kind of. Karen? There we go. I was testing you. Okay, good. Judy? Okay. What else? Or who else? Okay, how many people are we running, would you guess, average-wise, on a Sunday? 120. Okay, so what's 20% of that? 12? 24. Okay. So we have less than 24 up here. Yeah, we got to find some more. No, it's good. Would it be safe to say these are probably the top 20% or within that? Does that make sense? I don't need to circle them if they're all within the... Would that be fair to say?
We're only short 10. There's our problem.
There you go. Well, I appreciate you guys. That's not always easy to do. Now, the reason why this is important is because later on we're going to see, kind of how this comes into play more. But just from a priorities perspective, like I talked about before, if we focus on these people, like say the new guy needs to focus on these people so that everybody gets their needs met, right? The temptation is that the new guy needs to meet everybody's needs. He can't. It's impossible. It doesn't work. But if he focuses and pours into this group, they'll take care of the people that follow them. And everybody will get their needs met in that sense. And the church will be able to grow and flourish too. So it's kind of a different way to think. Again, I wish I'd known this 30 years ago. But what it is this is what happens in real life. You can have official meetings and say the meeting starts here. The minutes say the meeting started here and the meeting ended here, but guess what? That ain't the real meeting, right? The real meeting happens with these people, right? Whether they're official or not has nothing to do with it, right? You could be a janitor in an organization, have more influence than the CEO, just because you get those levels. You're relational and you care about people, you help them do things, and they They want to know what you think about it, right? On the way out, the security guard, so what do you think about this? Well, I've been here a long time, and that's going to go more weight than the new CEO guy, right? You know how that works. You guys have been around long enough to get that. Cool. All right. So one of the, kind of a funny story as I erase this. So there's a thing called unintended consequences, right? And you probably run into this. So my oldest daughter, baby Kaylin, who's taller than me, I think she's going to be coming for Christmas. I don't know if you'll get a chance to meet her or not. But anyway, you know, she pats me on the head and calls me little daddy now, but which is just not right. But so she was, you know, I was a new dad, so she's my baby Kaylin. So it was really cute because she would sit with me and she'd eat off my plate. It was just really cute, you know. And so I thought it was real fun for a while. But then I noticed she started eating more of my food, right? And if you know me, you know, when I grew up, if you put your hand in the other person's plate, you get a fork in it, right? It's my food, right? Get your own. That's, you know, we were real civilized in my house growing up. So I have, you know, asked my wife. She's always wanting to share. I'm like, share? Well, that wasn't in the marriage vows. I don't want to share my food with you. Get your own food. But anyway, she's helping me grow. But so I thought, well, I know what to do. I'll just eat faster, right? So, real caring dad there. So I started eating faster so I'd get more of my food, right? Because I thought it was cute. And guess what she learned to do?
Eat faster.
Yep. She's like a Marine now, right? Like I do. So I did not plan that, but that's what happened. So there's a lot of things that we do as individuals and as a church that have these unintended consequences that we didn't mean to happen, but they do, right? And a lot of that has to do with priorities, being able to think about, okay, what's the most important thing that Jesus said that we need to be doing, and then how do we do that? And then if something doesn't fit and something is creating other problems, let's work on that and change that. So, cool. The integrity chapter, we won't spend a lot of time on that, but there's some good things in here. I like how he defines integrity, the state of being unified. I had a friend on the San Jose Police Department when we started the church over there that, I don't know if they still do it on the tax forms, but the federal income tax, it asks you to list any illegal income. Does it still do that? But people will actually fill that out because, you know, if you're a bad guy, you're still afraid of the IRS, and I don't mess with them. So they actually list it. And so they'll call the local police department to go pick them up. I mean, it's just like, hello, that's not right. But so he got to do that sometimes. He thought it was pretty funny. But anyway, yeah, so always leave that blank. Just a little tip there for you. I paid good money for learning this stuff, so I'm going to write it down. This is the Hebrew word shalom. What do we normally assume or interpret this word? Right. And I guess I'm speaking about peace coming up here. So I'll have to get a picture of a hippie or a mushroom cloud or something. That's a bad joke. But anyway. Shalom. The idea here is to make whole, is what it really talks about. It's kind of the more of the literal meaning. So it's not just absence of conflict, right? It's more of this integrity or this wholeness that we look at. The Greek word sozo has the same kind of an idea. It's not just being saved from death or hell or that kind of thing, but it's that God not just wants to do that, he also wants to make us whole, make us integrated so that we're working together. I think there's a pretty good quote. Diana, you posted that on Facebook, didn't you? That was really good. He talks about a person with integrity does not have divided loyalties. That's duplicity. Nor is he or she merely pretending. That's hypocrisy. People with integrity are whole people. They can be identified by their single-mindedness. So, and that's kind of that old saying that, that one of the most important reasons not to lie is that you don't want to forget what you lied about, right? If you don't lie, you don't have to remember your lies. You just, are pretty straightforward. Who we are, and who we are in turn determines what we do. Our system of values is who we are. It establishes priorities in our lives and judges what we will accept or reject. Let's look at Romans 7. And again, a lot of this is just kind of review for you guys, but this is important to at least kind of hit. Romans 7, 21 to 25. Somebody want to read that?
So I find this law at work.
God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind, and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin.
Okay, thanks, Al. That's good. So, one illustration of this is, does anybody know who Paul Williams is? Okay, Doug does. So he was a big shot in our movement, smart guy. He's actually got he either has one PhD or two maybe in the DISC profile. It's a leadership thing, dominant, influential, that kind of stuff. So he's used to work at Go You Chapel in New York, and now they're, I think, I forgot what they're called, Orchard Group. But anyway, so he's always been involved in church planning. He actually came to Ozark when I was a student. They did a seminar, and I got excited about church planning from him. He was like the first guy to really get me excited about it. I'd heard about it, but didn't know much about it. He and Alan Ogram came in and did a seminar on a Saturday, and I got hooked. I just, man, this is great, right? What a great way to bring people to Christ. So I saw him about 4 years ago when I came back to Iowa and started this job. I was at Exponential, which is a church planning conference, and he was there doing a thing, and I ran up to him and said, hey, and I just told him who I was, and I thanked him for having an influence on me. I said, hey, because of you, God used my wife and I to start a church in Chicago and one in San Francisco Bay Area, and now I'm in Iowa helping find guys like me to start churches. And he's like, oh, that's great, made my day, all that kind of stuff. He was real happy. I think it was next year or a couple years after that, Facebook is just blowing up with stuff about him. And I'm like, what's going on? And someone's like, hey, did you see that? I'm like, no. And I look, and there's a picture of Paul Williams in a dress. And he's coming out being transgender. At first I thought, okay, why would somebody put, Photoshop him, a dress on him? That's kind of mean, right? But then I realized, no, that was him. He put his own dress on, and he, came out of the closet kind of a thing. And so, we talked about that, because guys that knew him and were influenced by him and stuff, and about it. And I said, I'm just getting tired of this coming out of the closet thing, because what people usually do when they come out of the closet is they believe this lie, and the lie is this. Whether they come out and say they're, homosexual, or they come out and say they're, transgender, or whatever they're coming out of the closet with, they're saying, society has all these crazy rules on us, or the church has all these crazy rules on me, and it's oppressing me, and it's binding me, or whatever. So if I just come out and announce who I am, I'll be free, right? Now, when we read Romans, that's not really true, is it? You don't really get this free thing. You get to decide, right? Who you're going to let win the struggle, right? Now, he was surprised when all his contracts got canceled and he's not the go-to guy anymore, right? And I wish he'd have just had a wear a dress Fridays, close all the blinds in his house. I don't want to know. Wear your dress at home. But why come out like that and, confuse all these people, right? And lead people astray. So anyway, it's a struggle. This integrity thing is a struggle for everybody. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how high up in the movement you are, how respected you are. I mean, he went from being one of those, personhood guys, right, where he had a lot of respect, to he lost it all because he had to come out and had to be him, right? It's like, well, you need to struggle, right? You struggle with your stuff, I'll struggle with my stuff, and who's going to rescue us from this? Jesus, right? It's going to be a struggle on this earth, and he'll give me victory on this earth to hold it together, but in heaven, I'll be free, right? So we just need to be reminded that, I think, as Christians, that it's going to be a struggle. Now, integrity is huge because I can't lead anybody without integrity, right? People can't trust me, it's over. There's no way. So that's why it's important that we are reminded about that. The other thing that he says is good. Well, first of all, I guess to tie in with that is we're all faced with conflicting desires. Integrity is the factor that determines which one will prevail. We struggle daily with a situation that demands a decision between what we want to do and what we ought to do, right? So that's kind of illustrated by Paul and what happened there. And then I like this other part too, where he says, integrity determines the ground rules for resolving these tensions. It determines who we are and how we'll respond before, and that's the key part if you're underlining this, before the conflict even appears. That is huge. We need to think ahead. It's going to be a struggle from this moment till the day I die, so let's plan for it, right? So let's plan ahead and say, okay, here's my weaknesses, here's my struggles. This is what I'm going to do, right, before I get in the middle of that kind of a thing. Anybody seen the movie Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe? Okay. Now, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to spoil it for you, so I'm sorry. But anyway, it makes a great point. But so he's obviously this mentally challenged guy, and I think Ron Howard produces it. So at the beginning, you're like, wow, this guy's cool. He's like really smart, and he has this government job on the side, and he's helping find spies and all that. And then you realize, wait a minute, the guy's a nut, right? You feel tricked because these people aren't real. They're just in his head, right? And so he has this mental illness, and so he was teaching at these Ivy League schools, but then, he was seeing people, so then they got him on medication. And, of course, then he was just kind of a vegetable at home and wasn't doing anything. And then later on into the movie, you see that he's teaching in an Ivy League school again. And somebody walks up to him and says, congratulations, and I think it's based on a true story, so-and-so, you just been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And instead of talking to her and engaging with her, he turns to one of the students and says, do you see her, right? And the student goes, yeah, she's real. And so then he turns back to the lady and says, you have to forgive me. I have to be suspicious of new friends, right? So what he's done is he's not taking his meds anymore, but what has he done? He's thought ahead of time on how to, handle the struggle that he has, right? He can find trusted people that can help him do the right thing. And that's really what the church is about, right? We need to be able to be that for each other. We need to be able to think ahead and say, if this is my struggle, what am I going to do down the road so I don't fall back into this kind of a thing? So again, not stuff that we didn't know, but just a reminder that's really good about that. I think it's page 37, that to earn trust, a leader has to be authentic. What you say and what you do needs to be the same thing. An example in starting a church or being there is if you say, hey, I'm going to be here at 8 o'clock, you need to be there before everyone else shows up, right? So if I have a ministry in the church and I'm doing that thing where I asked that friend to help me in the nursery, I need to be there before I told them to be there in case they're early, right? So they can see this is an important job, right? This nursery thing. It's not just, it's just church. It's not a big deal. It's huge. I wouldn't say it's more important than your job because Jesus wants you to be a good example at your job too. It's just as important, right? Don't get fired. That's not going to work. But at the same time, treat church with the same kind of thing. If we're consistent with that, people will catch on with that. If I've been praying for my neighbors, friends, and whoever, and they come, I invite them, I introduce them to other people. What I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, I'm inviting my friends to church, and you can too, right? It's not like, look at me, I'm better than you, none of that. But you're encouraging people that I'm taking this seriously, right? I'm inviting my friends, praying for them. You can do that too as a part of the church kind of a thing. So anyway, that's a good list. He has things about, it's more of a work setting, but we can translate it to a church one on that page there. Let's see. Page 41 is good, the pyramids. We tend to think that the higher up you go, the more benefits you have, but it's actually the other way around. A lot of times it's like, well, if you're a pastor, that means you get everything you want. No, it's actually the other way around. You actually, your opinions matter less and less the more influence you have. So if I'm like one of these top 20 influencers, right, my opinion should be pretty much kept to myself because why? I have a lot of influence. And if people know what my opinions are, I can get in the way of what God wants to. I'm not saying you can't have opinions, can't say you can't air them, but you need to be careful about who you share those with and how you do that because it does make a difference. And it kind of goes back to those gray areas of, food sacrifice to idols and those kinds of things. But it's something to think through. And part of this is, in churches sometimes we tend to think, we don't really think through kind of what we're communicating to people when we say to people that we focus on our rights, right, and less on our responsibilities. So a person that's focused on their rights are going to say things like, well, this is my church, it's my pew, it's my music, my style, my traditions, instead of great responsibility, great commission responsibility, right? So I have more responsibility and I have less rights. I might not like this song, that music, but hey, if it's bringing people to Christ and I can be a part of that, then it's more about the responsibility than my own preferences and stuff like that, which is a real important thing. And so a good example of that is a new church is kind of like a jet ski. You can, has anybody ever ridden a jet ski? I haven't done that yet, but it's kind of like a motorcycle on the water. How many people do you have to talk to turn a jet ski around? Yeah, if you're driving it, talk to yourself. Where if you're behind, you got to say, hey, knucklehead, go that way, right? You can turn that thing around like that, right? Now, the older you are, say you're, how old is the church again here? 600? I'm just kidding. 100. 100, okay. So if you're 100 years old or so, you're like an aircraft carrier, right? Now, that's not a bad thing. It's different, right? Jet ski, aircraft carrier. Jet ski, you can, if you need to make a change to, to be more effective or to reach people for Christ, you can do it quick, right? But, there's not a lot of sturdiness to a jet ski, right? It doesn't take much to knock it over, right? That kind of thing. Whereas an aircraft carrier, you can turn it around, but you got to talk to a lot of people. It's like a floating city. You got to communicate and communicate and communicate until you can't stand the communicating anymore. Because there's a lot of people you have to talk to. There's a lot of traditions that people are used to, doing things a certain way. And you got to talk it a lot for people to kind of get, we do have to turn this battleship, right? The great news is you can change it. You can turn a aircraft carrier. But it takes a lot of communication, takes a lot of intentionality. If so-and-so's flying recon or he's fighting bogeys over here, you got to tell him where you're going because he's going to need to come back and get fuel, right? And all that stuff, right? The good thing about an aircraft carrier is it can take a lot, right? It has a lot of resources to it. So you have a lot of firepower in an aircraft carrier that you don't have with a new church, so to speak. So there's positives and negatives to it, right? And that's the great thing about this leadership stuff is this is how you turn a big aircraft carrier and you get people to think in terms of not it's my church or it's always been my church and my family's church or whatever, but it's Jesus' church and he's called us to have responsibility, not rights, which is a huge way to kind of look at it and think through that. One last illustration and I'll let you go. Wait a minute. That's a different one. So we can go. Let me pray and I'll let you go. Father, thanks for today and an opportunity for us to share the leadership stuff. I thank you for your love for us. Thank you for this church. And Lord, I pray you'll be with us this week and encourage us, Lord, as we follow you. We love you and it's in your son's name we pray. Amen. So next week is what chapter or Urs? Just chapter 4. Okay, so that's a positive change. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, we're not doing it next week. Thanksgiving. Okay, so don't be here. Okay, sorry. So after we get back, then it's creating positive change. Cool. All right. Thanks for coming.